There can be no nullification without war with the United States. That was a comment that was on the Facebook invite thing for this event. Somebody posted that there could be no nullification without war. And I thought to myself, that's really weird, because in the last 2 years, nearly every state in the Union has done something to undermine federal authority. And I've not seen the war yet. So something's wrong, But you get this kind of thing from a lot of different people, that it can't work because it's going to create war. It's ridiculous. In fact, I would argue that when you have a federal government that pretty much does whatever it wants, that's where your war is. It's a war against the American people. I mean, we have a federal government today that regulates what type of light bulb you can screw into your light socket and how much water you can have in your toilet. There's your war for you. So it's kind of like this. There's this old farmer, and he's out working on the fence line out kind of in a distant field, and he sees in the distance a cloud of dust coming up the road. And a moment later, a big black SUV pulls up, and this guy gets out, and he's wearing the suit and the dark sunglasses, and he's got the little earwick in his ear, and he jumps in and goes, "I'm with the FBI, and we're conducting an investigation." The farmer leans up against the fence, says, "Well, all right." And the FBI agent says, "And I need to search every field on this farm." The farmer says, "Well, I guess you do what you ought to do. But let me tell you, you don't want to go in that field right over there." Well, this FBI agent, he puffs up his chest and he pulls out his badge and he holds it up and he says, "You see this badge? This means I can go where I want, when I want, and how I want." The farmer said, "All right, do what you got to do." So, of course, the first place the FBI agent goes is in that field, right? So he goes out there and he walks and kind of gets off in the distance, and all of a sudden you hear this blood-curdling scream. And you see this FBI agent just flying as fast as he can, and right behind him is this giant bull. And he's yelling at the farmer. He's leaning against the fence. "What do I do? What do I do?" And the farmer goes, "Show him your badge." So that's really, it's kind of like what the federal government is today, because it's in all kinds of things that it really doesn't have any business being in. And it's pretending like it has all of this authority. And really the only reason it has so much authority is because we let it have that much authority. Now, merely by saying this labels me as an extremist. And I'm sure that I'm in good company, because you're probably all extremists too. And I'll be honest, when I first started working with the 10th Amendment Center, it bothered me a little bit when people would accuse me of being an extremist. Nobody wants to be called names, right? But then I started thinking about it. And I'm like, well, what's the mainstream giving us? It's the mainstream people that gave us the $640 toilet. It's the non-extreme people that are groping me at the airport. It's the normal people that have run up, $22 trillion in debt. So if I'm an extremist, maybe that's not so bad, right? Maybe being an extremist is a good thing. Maybe we need some more extremists in the world. And if, in fact, I'm an extremist because I believe that the federal government should be limited, then I'm in good company. James Madison, Thomas Jefferson, even Alexander Hamilton said that the federal government would be limited. Now, he probably was lying when he said that, but never mind, he did say it. So it's obvious, and we've talked about this and we've touched on this, that the federal government that was created by the Constitution was intended to have very limited power. And most of the power and the authority was meant to be left at the state level. This is not questionable. Now, academics will try to argue it, but if they're honest, there's no argument here. And throughout the day, we've talked about this concept of nullification. This is the real root of the question. If the Constitution created that kind of government, what do we do when the federal government exceeds its authority? What can we actually do about it? Because without some type of enforcement mechanism, the Constitution is only what James Madison called a parchment barrier. I mean, it doesn't do us much good. It doesn't do us any more good than waving that badge that the bull was going to do, right? There has to be some type of practical way that we can check federal power, and there is indeed. But it's important that we have good strategy. And it's very interesting. We've talked about the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions today, written by Thomas Jefferson and James Madison. And I just finished up an ebook that we published over at the 10th Amendment Center. And if you're a member of the 10th Amendment Center, you can actually download it now. We're going to make it available to the general public here in the next couple of weeks. But the book is basically just a collection of 10 letters that were circulated between Jefferson, Madison, and Wilson Carey Nicholas. And it reveals the strategy behind the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions and their resistance to the Alien and Sedition Acts. And it's really fascinating because you realize that the resolutions were just the first step. And in fact, the resolutions didn't really nullify anything in and of themselves. They were resolutions. They created a principle. But if you read these letters, and there's one in particular that Jefferson wrote to Madison in August of 1799, so it was almost a year after the resolutions had been passed, and he talks about, okay, what do we do next? And he said, first, we answer the reasonings of such the states as have ventured into the field of reason, and that the Committee of Congress here, they have given us all the advantage we should wish. Take some notice of those states which either have not answered at all or answered without reasoning. So the first thing Jefferson's saying, these states that have answered the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions, let's take on what they said. Let's challenge their reasoning. And he said, then make a firm protestation against the principles and the precedent and the reservation of the rights resulting to us from these palpable violations of the constitutional compact by the federal government and the approbation of the acquiescence of the several coast states, so that we may hereafter do what we might now rightfully do. So you see, they had set it up, and now Madison's saying, we're going to answer these charges, and then we're going to proceed on and do what we have the right to do. And it's interesting, if you go on and read this letter, one of the things, Jefferson was willing at that point, and he said this to Madison, he was willing to go to the point of secession. He mentions that in this letter. Of course, as we've already heard, they didn't have to go to that extent. They ended up having the election of 1800, and it was all a moot point. But the point is that there was a strategy, and that these resolutions and principles underlied something that was going to happen down the road, further action. So what is the further action? That's the question. What can we do? Now, I think it's important, before I move on, is to kind of do something that we've started doing at the 10th Amendment Center that's helped us to explain things to people. There's basically two definitions of nullification. There is a legal definition of nullification, and that would literally be striking a law off the books. So it's basically what a court can do. A court can nullify a law for whatever reason. It strikes it off the books. It no longer exists. So that's the legal definition. But there's also a practical definition of nullification. And the practical definition is basically making something ineffective. So it might still be on the books, but it's not enforceable anymore. So keeping those two definitions in mind, I believe that states have the legal authority to nullify in a legal sense. I mean, I think we can make that argument constitutionally. I think we've heard many of those arguments today from contract law. But the fact of the matter is, in the political environment that we live in today, we're not going to get anybody that's going to be able to nullify a federal law legally. I'm not going to erase it off the books. It's not going to happen. So what we do at the 10th Amendment Center is we focus on practical nullification. Our objective is to make these federal laws that are overreaching, ineffective, null, void, in effect. I don't care if they're on the books or not. If they can't enforce them, it doesn't matter. Now, interestingly, we have a blueprint that we can follow that Madison gave us, even before the Constitution was ratified, that shows us how to face overreaching federal power. And he wrote this in Federalist 46, because this was an issue even before ratification. People were asking, hey, you're telling us we're going to have this limited government. What do we do when the federal government oversteps? And Madison wrote this. He said, should an unwarrantable measure of the federal government be unpopular in particular states, which would seldom fail to be the case, or even a warrantable measure be so, which may sometimes be the case, the means of opposition to it are powerful and at hand. Now notice something interesting here. Madison starts with the idea of resisting unconstitutional acts, unwarrantable acts. But he says we can even take these principles and apply them to warrantable acts that are simply impossible. So in other words, if the federal government does something that's constitutional but dumb, the states still have a remedy. So what was the remedy? This is what he said. He said we can have protestations of the governors was kind of the first step he talked about. And the repugnance and the outrage of the people, those were important. But the key part of Federalist 46 is a refusal to cooperate with officers of the Union. I love that. A refusal to cooperate with officers of the Union. Therein lies the key to resisting federal power. Simply refuse to cooperate. Just say no. I mean, this is so easy, a 3-year-old can do it, right? No! He said that this would oppose in any state very serious impediments. And were the sentiments of several adjoining states happen to be in union, it would present obstructions which the federal government would hardly be willing to encounter. So Madison saw this refusal to cooperate as something that could create not only impediments, but obstructions to federal power. Because he recognized something that's very, very important. The federal government depends on the states and the localities to do virtually everything that they do. And think about it. Madison was writing this. The federal government truly was more limited than it is today. Today, it's even more intertwined with the states and localities. Now, I'll give you the practical example. We drove in here. We actually drove down on Thursday, and we spoke up in Marietta. And yesterday, we drove down from Marietta to the airport. And at one point, we were on a road, and the speed limit was 55 miles an hour. Now, how many of you think that I was driving 55 miles an hour? No. I was driving about 65, 70. I was getting my doors blown off, okay? Apparently, Atlanta, 55 is a mere suggestion. There's no way. There wasn't anybody that was driving 55 that was anywhere around us. You know, maybe a truck hauling a big load or something. Now, the speed limit says 55. The police could technically pull you over for going 65 miles an hour, but they don't have the manpower to pull over 200,000 vehicles. It's not possible. So, in effect, that 55 mile an hour speed limit on that stretch of road was nullified. Still on the books, but unenforceable and ineffective. I'll give you another example that's similar. Now, I've never been to, how many of you have been to Mardi Gras? Okay, several of you have been to Mardi Gras. Okay, I've never been to Mardi Gras. But in Tampa, they have Gasparilla Festival. I think we have a Tampan in here. You know about Gasparilla. It's kind of like Mardi Gras, but it's pirates. And if you go to Gasparilla, you will see people walking around the streets of Tampa with open containers. Not legal. You'll see people intoxicated in public. Also not legal. You will see women flashing their breasts at men. Not legal. You will see police officers sitting back, leaning against fences, watching all of this go on, not arresting a soul. There is no way that the Tampa Police Department, the entire Florida State Police, and probably the National Guard could control a crowd of 300,000 people that wanted to drink some beer and throw beads around. The law is nullified in effect. Those laws are still on the book. If I go there today, wander around in public intoxicated, I'd probably go to jail. But the sheer numbers make it impossible to enforce. So that's what we're talking about at the 10th Amendment Center today when we talk about nullification. The prime example of this, and I thank Don for bringing this up already because he's broken the ice, is marijuana. And personally, I'm not like a fan of marijuana, okay? I don't smoke marijuana. I've never smoked marijuana. Don't want to smoke marijuana. If you ask me, I'll tell you probably shouldn't smoke marijuana. But the fact of the matter is, marijuana is an issue that rightfully belongs at the state level. There is no authority for the federal government to regulate marijuana, to regulate, as Clarence Thomas put it, 6 plants in some woman's backyard. Way outside of the bounds. And if anybody doubts me, and if anybody ever questions you about this, ask them why they needed a constitutional amendment to prohibit alcohol. They knew it then. I mean, what's changed? Nothing. In 1995, as Don already pointed out, the state of California legalized by a voter referendum medical marijuana. And the feds cracked down. They weren't going to have any of this. And yet, the medical marijuana business started to grow. And then we had the Raich case, which is the case that the Supreme Court ruled that, yes, the federal government can regulate 6 plants in your backyard. And you know what happened? Nothing. California didn't start shutting down their medical. In fact, it grew. In fact, more states started having medical marijuana because people wanted it. Today we have, I know we're at 26. There's a couple that may have already passed. We may be up to 28 states that have medical marijuana. We have Colorado, Oregon, Alaska, and Washington State that have legalized marijuana recreationally. Yeah, and there's several that have referendums. This genie is never going back in the bottle. Now, federal prohibition is still on the books, but it is absolutely impossible for them to enforce marijuana prohibition in these states that don't want it enforced. Now, a lot of people will tell you, this is the objection I get, well, it's just because of Obama. Obama doesn't care about weed, and he could enforce it if he wanted to, but he just doesn't. That's not true. Between 2009 and 2013, President Obama's administration spent $100 million more cracking down on medical marijuana dispensaries than George W. Bush did. And George W. Bush had the record. So in those early years of the Obama administration, he was actually enforcing medical marijuana more aggressively than previous presidents. And yet, he wasn't able to stop it. Now, it's true today that they're basically letting it go, but they don't have any choice. And here's the truth of the matter. Right before Colorado had their recreational marijuana go into effect, the federal government did what they quoted, this is how the newspaper put it, a massive crackdown on medical marijuana dispensaries. And basically what it was we're going to flex our muscle and show you that we're still in charge. So they rolled into Denver and they cracked down on, I think they busted 12 medical marijuana dispensaries in a couple of homes. And this was massive. I mean, this is the news. They literally called this a massive enforcement effort. And 12 dispensaries, that sounds pretty impressive, right? You know how many medical marijuana dispensaries there are in Denver? 400. So they got 12 out of 400. That was massive. Now, the funny part of it is that we were able to get a hold of some numbers that kind of indicate the amount of money that it costs to do an investigation and to crack down on a medical marijuana dispensary. And in order for them to shut down all 400 of those medical marijuana dispensaries in one city, in one state, would cost twice the DEA's annual budget. So that puts it into perspective, right? The federal government is not as big and bad as we think it is. The only reason that marijuana prohibition worked as long as it did was because state and local governments were cooperating in the enforcement of it. In fact, 99 out of 100 marijuana arrests are at the state and local level. So when a state removes part of that reason for arrest, there's no way that the federal government can crack down. So it's exactly what Madison was saying. Refusal to cooperate with officers of the union puts us in a position that we can undermine what the federal government wants to do. Now, the beautiful part of all this is that this strategy has the full backing of the Supreme Court. Now, generally speaking, I don't really care what the Supreme Court says. Not my thing. But I am more than happy to use the Supreme Court to my advantage when I can. And in this case, I can. And this is a matter of strategy. When we first started doing this type of work at the 10th Amendment Center, we were pushing real hardcore nullification bills. They would say nullification in them, and they would talk about the law being null and void within the state. And like I said, all of this is constitutionally legitimate. But try convincing some nationalist chair of the Judiciary Committee, right? Can't do it. So we had to come up with a strategy to get around this. And the beauty of non-cooperation is that it is fully supported by Supreme Court precedent, and it's what's called the AntiCommandeering Doctrine. The AntiCommandeering Doctrine rests on 4 Supreme Court cases that date back to 1842. And the funny part of it is that 1842 decision happened to be our good friend Joseph Story, who generally I loathe. But in this case, he gave us a little bit of a jewel, and it was in one of the fugitive slave cases. Prig was. It was a runaway slave. And the issue was, could states interfere with fugitive slave rendition in their own states? And Story said, no, you can't because the Fugitive Slave Clause is in the Constitution. But he said this, he said, the clause is found in the national constitution and not in that of any state. It does not point out any state functionaries or any state action to carry its provisions into effect. The states cannot therefore be compelled to enforce them. And it might well be deemed an unconstitutional exercise of the power of interpretation to insist that states are bound to provide means to carry into effect the duties of the national government, nowhere delegated or instructed to them by the Constitution. That's the anti-commandeering right there. Story was saying that the fugitive slave rendition is a federal issue, so therefore the federal government has to carry it out. The states cannot be compelled to help. Thank you very much, we won't. And in fact, that's what a lot of northern states ended up doing. Now, this has been built upon. There's 3 other cases. The key case is Prince versus U.S., and that was in 1996, I believe. And some of you might be familiar with Sheriff Mack. It's the Sheriff Mack case. And it was during the Brady gun bill. And one provision in the Brady gun bill was that the county law officers, which basically is the sheriffs, they were required to help administer the gun registration program that was in the Brady bill. And these 2 sheriffs sued, and they said, wait a minute, you can't make us run your gun registration program. And the Supreme Court, in a weird moment of lucidity, actually got this one right. And this is what they said. This is the key phrase of it. He says, we held in New York, this was a previous case, that Congress cannot compel the states to enact or enforce a federal regulatory program. Today we hold that Congress cannot circumvent that prohibition by conscripting the state officers directly. The federal government may neither issue directives requiring states to address particular problems, nor command the state officers or those of their political subdivisions to administer or enforce a federal regulatory program. It matters not whether policymaking is involved, and no case-by-case weighing of the burdens or benefits is necessary. Such commands are fundamentally incompatible with our constitutional system of dual sovereignty. So, we have a legal precedent that we can now go to. Mr. I'm a judge or a lawyer, and I head the Judiciary Committee. We have a legal precedent that we can go to with them and say, look, maybe we can't stop physically the federal government from enacting this program, but we don't have to help. And they have absolutely no way that they can object to that legally. And what this has done is this has allowed us to advance nullification, in effect, legislation, without having to fight the philosophical argument about nullification with a bunch of federal supremacists. Now, this is what's really interesting. And I talked about the amount of cooperation that goes on between the state and the federal government. You all remember the weird kind of funky government shutdown in 2013 when the federal government shut down? Basically, all I ever saw was that they put cones up and wouldn't let you go to Mount Rushmore, which I thought was funny. They closed a mountain. So that was your government shutdown. But there was an interesting letter that was sent out by the National Association of Governors. And they were worried about this impending shutdown. And in that letter, this is what they said. They said, states are partners with the federal government on most federal programs. Now think about that. Most federal programs. That means by simply not being a partner, not working with the federal government, we have the potential to hinder or even shut down most federal programs. So how does this work? Well, we've seen how it works in medical marijuana. You can apply this principle to all kinds of things. Guns. Idaho passed a bill 2 years ago. In that bill, they have committed to not enforcing any future federal gun control that happens to be passed by the federal government. So if the Obama administration was to do some kind of weird executive order or Congress passes a law, Idaho will not use state officers, no state police, no sheriffs, no state resources to enforce that federal gun law. Perfectly legal under the Anti-Commandeering Doctrine. And basically what they're saying is, okay, ATF, you enforce your federal gun law yourself. Okay, might not be that significant just in Idaho, but imagine if 25 or 30 states had legislation similar to that. There is no way that the ATF, with their, 400 agents, are going to be able to enforce a gun law in 30 or 40 states. They cannot do it. Obamacare relies completely on the states to do all of these types of, create this and do that and enforce that. Don't do it. We don't need Congress to repeal it. They're never going to repeal it. And if they do, they're going to replace it with something equally unconstitutional. Just don't enforce it. Don't set it up. Most federal programs, here's my favorite, and this is how you can apply this to even weird things that you would think the states have absolutely no control over. NSA. We had all these revelations a few years ago from Snowden about the NSA and the spying and the amount of data that they're collecting outside of the parameters of the Fourth Amendment. So how does a state deal with that? Well, we started looking at it, and it turns out there's a huge NSA facility in Bluffdale, Utah. This NSA facility is basically a giant storage facility. So it's kind of like, imagine if the FBI came to your house and opened up your mailbox and took all your mail and scanned it, and when you started objecting, they'd be like, no, we're not going to read it now. We're just going to save it in case we need to read it later. That's basically what they're doing. They're storing all of this data in Bluffdale. This facility in Bluffdale uses 42.7 million gallons of water a day in order to cool all of these computers. The water is supplied by the city of Bluffdale, which is a subdivision of the state of Utah. We realized that the city of Bluffdale had actually entered into a contract with the NSA to supply the water. They don't have to. So the state of Utah could turn off the water to the NSA facility. In fact, they actually did this in Nevada. There was a Yucca Mountain, there was a radioactive dump site that they wanted to dump a bunch of radioactive waste in. Nevada didn't want it there. It was in a seismically dangerous place. It was one of these federal boondoggles. And when the federal government, the Department of Energy, went to get permits to drill so that they could build these, build the underground storage facilities, the Nevada Department of Resources refused to give them the water permits. Federal government sued, went to federal court. Federal court said, it's Nevada's water, they can do with it as they please. So there's today no nuclear waste dump on Yucca Mountain. Turned off the water. So there are all kinds of things in all types of different areas that the states can simply refuse to cooperate with the officers of the union. It undermines their authority. It undermines their power. It allows us to get rid of things or make things ineffective. And we can start with little things. And I'm going to close with this one last example. Right to try bill. How many of you have heard of right to try? Nobody. A couple people. This is a state level legislation that has been now introduced and passed in almost every state in the union. And basically all it does is it allows people who have terminal illnesses to access treatments that have not been approved by the FDA. So it just bypasses the whole FDA system. It's a beautiful thing. You know what's so beautiful about it? Nobody can object. Nobody's going to say, oh, that dying person shouldn't be able to have that treatment. It might kill them. Of course not. So it's an issue that everybody, left, right, center, on the moon, can agree with, and it undermines federal authority. So this is what we're trying to do at the 10th Amendment Center. We're trying to find creative ways to use the Anti-Commandeering Doctrine to undermine federal authority, to put more power back in the hands of the state. And I encourage you to go to our website, 10thamendmentcenter.com. You can see the different issues that we're working on and the different model legislation. And I want to close just with a quote. I do this because I want to live free. That's the bottom line for me. I want liberty. I don't want the federal government telling me how to flush my toilet. I can figure it out for myself. Thank you. And I realized about 5 years ago that something needs to be done. We need to figure out something practical. And I came across this quote, and it's by Frederick Douglass, who may not be the most popular person in this room, but he was right on this. He said, find out just what people will submit to, and you have found out the exact amount of injustice and wrong which will be imposed upon them. And these will be continued until they are resisted with either words or blows or both. The limits of tyrants are prescribed by the endurance of those whom they oppress. And I ran out of endurance quite a long time ago, and that's why I do what I do. I appreciate you guys being here. I appreciate your willingness to think outside of the 3x5 index card of acceptable opinion that Tom Woods talks about a lot. And I ask you to just go forth and keep doing it. So thank you very much.